Forget the grunting brute. Neanderthals were far more sophisticated than you imagine. The old picture shows a hunched, hairy, club-wielding caveman. It appears in movies. It appears in cartoons. It appears in some old museum displays. It suggests they were a failed experiment in humanity, a clumsy side branch on our family tree. This stereotype is deeply ingrained in our culture. We even use the word Neanderthal as an insult for someone who is crude or unintelligent. But this picture is completely wrong, and it is time we replaced it with a more accurate one. The old stereotype has a long history. It started with the very first Neanderthal skeleton found in the 19th century. Scientists at the time misinterpreted its features. They saw a creature that was stooped and brutish. That first impression stuck because it made Homo sapiens seem special. It created a simple story of progress, where we were the clever winners. Comforting, but not based on good evidence. It took over a century of patient, detailed scientific work to correct and dismantle that view. In this essay, we will look at the surprising new evidence that paints a very different picture of Neanderthal life. We will see that the line between us and them is much blurrier than we ever thought. To understand Neanderthals, we first need to place them in time and space. They were not our direct ancestors, but our close cousins. Their story begins long before ours. Neanderthals lived across a huge area. Imagine a vast territory stretching from the coasts of Portugal to the mountains of Siberia. This was their homeland for an immense period. They were true Eurasians, adapted to a continent that experienced dramatic swings in climate, cool, temperate periods, the bitter cold of full-blown ice ages. They were not a short-lived species. They were a true success story of survival. Let's put their existence on a simple timeline. Neanderthals lived from about 400,000 years ago until they disappeared around 40,000 years ago. For perspective, our own species, Homo sapiens, only arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago. This means that for most of their existence, Neanderthals had the entire continent of Europe to themselves. They evolved there and adapted to its unique challenges. Neanderthals were generally shorter and more robust than modern humans. Stocky builds, powerful limbs, broad chests, wide noses. These features were excellent adaptations for a physically demanding lifestyle in a cold climate. A compact body helps conserve heat. Strong muscles were necessary for hunting large animals like mammoths and woolly rhinos. Their skulls were also different from ours, yet their brains were just as large as ours, and in some cases, even larger. We are talking about a distinct and highly successful type of human. Now that we know who the Neanderthals were, let's tackle the biggest myths head-on. The first and most common myth is that Neanderthals were stupid. This idea is damaging. It paints them as simple-minded creatures who could not think, plan, or innovate. People imagine them struggling to survive, barely able to make a simple tool. This could not be further from the truth. As we will see, their technology, hunting strategies, and ability to adapt to changing environments all point to sharp, flexible intelligence. The second major myth is that they were ugly and brutish, the classic caveman stereotype: hairy, dirty, permanently hunched over, communicating only with grunts and snarls. That image comes from early scientific error and fantasy. The first reconstructed Neanderthal skeleton was an elderly individual with severe arthritis, which made him look stooped. In reality, Neanderthals stood fully upright. Their faces were different. Strong brow ridges and large noses, but simply a different human face, not an ugly or primitive one. The third myth is that Neanderthals lacked culture, art, or symbolic thought. For a long time, scientists said only Homo sapiens thought in symbols. That clear line between them and us has been erased by new discoveries. One of the strongest arguments against the stupid myth comes from the tools Neanderthals made. Their toolkit was far from simple. For hundreds of thousands of years, they produced a sophisticated set of stone tools known as the Mousterian industry. This was not just about banging two rocks together. It involved a complex and planned process. A key technique was the Levallois method, carefully preparing a core so that a single final strike would produce a flake of a predetermined size and shape. Like a sculptor visualizing the final form, this technique required skill, patience, and the ability to think several steps ahead. It shows a high level of cognitive ability. Levallois flakes could be used as is for butchering or further shaped into specialized tools, stone points for spears, scrapers for hides, sharp-edged knives for meat and plants. A versatile and effective toolkit, successful for an immense stretch of time. Neanderthal technology was not static. It showed regional variation and innovation. In some places, they made long, thin blades, once thought exclusive to Homo sapiens. They also created bone tools, such as lissoir, still used by leather workers today. Perhaps most impressively, they understood hafting, attaching stone points to wooden shafts. A 2018 study in Italy found evidence of a glue made from pine resin and beeswax, requiring collection, controlled heating, and mixing. It is a form of ancient chemistry, far beyond the grunting brute of popular imagination. For decades, the ability to think symbolically was considered the exclusive domain of our own species. Art, decoration, ritual. Neanderthals, it was argued, lived in a world without meaning, a purely practical existence. However, a wave of incredible discoveries has turned this idea on its head. We now have compelling evidence that Neanderthals had their own symbolic traditions. They appreciated color, created patterns, adorned their bodies. At many sites across Europe, archaeologists have found lumps of black manganese dioxide and red ochre, natural earth pigments, actively collected, transported, and sometimes ground into powder for use. They may have used them to paint their bodies, to color animal hides, to make marks on surfaces. This use of color goes beyond pure function, making a statement, identity, seeing the world in a symbolic way. At Cueva de los Aviones in Spain, perforated seashells with red and yellow pigment, dated to around 115,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, were likely worn as ornaments. At La Pasiega, red painted lines, dots, and a ladder-like shape were dated to over 64,000 years ago, proving they were made by Neanderthals and representing the oldest known cave art in the world. In Croatia at Krapina, eagle talons show cut marks and polishing, likely pendants. Engraved bones, engraved stones, even a raven bone with evenly spaced notches, creating and wearing ornaments, painting symbols, is about communication, identity, a shared understanding of meaning. How a society treats its dead can tell us a great deal about their beliefs and their social bonds. For a long time, it was debated whether Neanderthals simply discarded their dead or if they treated them with care and respect. The evidence is now overwhelmingly clear. Neanderthals intentionally buried their dead. This implies emotional depth and symbolic thought. An intentional burial is more than just getting rid of a body. It is an act of remembrance and a way of showing respect. It is a profoundly human behavior. One famous example comes from Shanidar Cave in Iraq. In the 1950s, Ralph Solecki excavated several Neanderthal skeletons. Shanidar 4 was found in a grave with large amounts of pollen. Solecki suggested a flower burial. While some now argue rodents could have brought pollen, the careful placement of the body still points to an intentional burial. At La Chapelle aux Saints in France, an elderly man with severe arthritis and tooth loss lived to old age, evidence of care. When he died, his community dug a grave and placed him inside. Compassion in life and death speaks to strong social bonds. At La Pharisee, a family including adults and children were interred. A 2020 study confirmed deliberate burial of a 2-year-old. This repeated pattern across sites and millennia shows a tradition of burial, the dead seen as individuals who deserved a final act of care. The question of whether Neanderthals could speak is one of the most fascinating and difficult to answer. Language does not fossilize. We cannot dig up a conversation. We can look for clues in their anatomy, their genes, their behavior. For a long time, the dominant view held that Neanderthals lacked the capacity for complex speech, fitting the brutish stereotype. First, anatomy. The hyoid bone supports the tongue and is crucial for speech. In 1989, a complete Neanderthal hyoid was found at Kabara Cave, virtually identical to ours. Computer models show it would function like ours, allowing complex tongue and larynx movements. Second, genetics. With the Neanderthal genome mapped, scientists compared DNA. One key gene is FOXP2, linked to fine motor control of mouth and larynx. Mutations cause severe speech problems. Neanderthals had the same FOXP2 version we do. Not proof, but it removes a major barrier. Finally, behavior. Coordinated hunts with spears require planning and communication. Teaching complex toolmaking is much easier with language. Living in social groups, caring for the sick, passing down traditions. Evidence suggests Neanderthal life was not silent. We may never know exactly how they sounded, but the anatomical, genetic, and behavioral clues point toward speech. The control of fire was a huge turning point in human evolution. Fire provides warmth, protection from predators, and a way to cook food. Some argued Neanderthals relied only on natural fires. Evidence from countless sites now shows they had a sophisticated, long-standing relationship with fire. They were not just users of fire, they were masters of it. Archaeologists find structured, deliberately built fireplaces, pits, and stone-lined hearths, often in the same locations over generations, showing fire was central to daily life, the heart of their homes, a place to gather, to cook, to work, and to find safety. Microscopic analysis reveals charred wood, burnt animal bones, and roasted plants. Neanderthals were regularly cooking their food. Cooking unlocks nutrients, eases digestion, and kills pathogens, an energetic advantage. Their diet was varied, not only mammoth steaks, but small birds, rabbits, nuts, seeds, and tubers. Along coasts, mussels, clams, and seals. At Vanguard Cave in Gibraltar, there is evidence of a cooked dolphin. Accessing these foods required knowledge of tides and coastal environments. This dietary diversity plus cooking paints a picture of resourceful, knowledgeable people. Fire was the key technology that made this flexible, successful lifestyle possible. For tens of thousands of years, Neanderthals had Eurasia to themselves. Around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens arrived from Africa. For the first time, two kinds of intelligent, tool-making humans shared the same landscape. The story is not one of simple replacement or violent conquest. Archaeological and genetic evidence reveals interaction, cultural exchange, and, most surprisingly, interbreeding. They were sometimes partners, not just competitors. In 2010, scientists fully sequenced the Neanderthal genome and compared it worldwide. All non-African populations today carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, a direct echo of ancient encounters. Our ancestors had children together, and their descendants integrated into Homo sapiens groups. Genetic mixing happened more than once, likely wherever groups met. Some inherited Neanderthal genes may have been beneficial, affecting skin pigmentation or the immune system, helping adaptation to new climates. Neanderthals did not completely vanish. A small part of them lives on in billions of people today, their legacy written into our biology, a ghost in our machine. Beyond genes, artifacts show blended traditions, learning and exchange alongside competition for game and shelter. Their disappearance was likely complex: climate change, competition, and absorption into larger modern human populations. We began with the image of the brutish, club-wielding caveman. We can now confidently leave that caricature in the past. The scientific evidence gathered over the last few decades has given us a new Neanderthal, an intelligent, resourceful, and complex human. They were not a failed evolutionary dead end, but a highly successful lineage that thrived for hundreds of thousands of years in the challenging world of Ice Age Eurasia. They were master toolmakers, skilled hunters, masters of fire. Their minds were capable of planning, innovation, and adapting to a changing world. They were not our inferiors, but our equals in many ways. They had a rich inner world. They used pigments and created ornaments, foundations of art and culture. They cared for their sick and elderly and intentionally buried their dead. Behaviors of a people with a culture, a history, and a deep sense of community. Anatomical and genetic clues point towards speech. Interbreeding with our ancestors blurs the line between us and them. They are part of our own heritage, our family tree intertwining with theirs. The story of human origins is always evolving. What's the biggest misconception you had about Neanderthals? Subscribe for more deep dives.